He told me he was straight before I even had the chance to ask. That was the first thing he said, with this quick, almost nervous laugh like he was trying to get ahead of something he thought I might assume. We were sitting at a tiny cafe table outside a dive bar on a Thursday night, the kind of place with dim string lights and a sticky wooden floor, and I was trying to figure out why I was already so drawn to him, even though he seemed to be shutting me down before we'd really started. I wasn't planning on meeting anyone that night. Honestly, I was there because my friends dragged me out after a week that felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Work was a mess. My apartment was a disaster zone, and I was pretty positive my cat judged me daily. The bar was loud in a way that made it easy to forget your own thoughts, and the idea of making small talk sounded exhausting. So when I spotted him across the room, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, watching the band like he was memorizing every chord, I didn't expect my heart to do that thing where it skips a beat and suddenly I'm paying way too much attention. He had this casual kind of look, like jeans and a plain black tee that fit just right without trying too hard. His dark hair was a little messy, and he had these eyes. Honestly, that's what got me first. They weren't the flashy kind that you notice immediately, but they held something deeper, like they were always watching, always thinking. I don't know, man. There was just something about him that felt off the usual track, like he was both here and somewhere else at the same time. I don't remember how I ended up sitting next to him. One minute I was nursing a beer and scrolling on my phone. The next I'm trying not to look obvious as I watch him tap his fingers on the table, nodding slightly to the music. At some point, we started talking. The usual stuff. Music, what brought us here, the lame excuse about needing to get out of the house. He laughed a little too quickly when I joked about how bad my dating life was, and I found myself wanting to keep the conversation going. Maybe that's why when he suddenly said, "Look, I should just get this out of the way. I'm straight," I blinked and almost laughed because it was the last thing I expected. Not because I was upset or offended, but because the way he said it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like he was trying to explain something that had nothing to do with the conversation we'd been having. Like it was important to him that I know, but at the same time, he wasn't really sure why. I shrugged and for some reason I answered honestly, "Okay, thanks for telling me." He smiled, but it wasn't the easy kind. It was like a crack in the surface, a glimpse of something else behind his eyes. Sorry if that's weird. People assume stuff, you know? I nodded, because yeah, I got that. I've been on both ends of the people assume spectrum more times than I care to count. But here's the thing. I wasn't looking for labels or explanations. I was just interested. Curious, really. Because his eyes said something different. They said maybe he wasn't as straight as he wanted me to believe, or maybe he wasn't even sure himself, or maybe he just wanted someone to see him without all the stories he told to keep people comfortable. We ended up talking for hours that night, well past last call, about everything and nothing, about the kind of stuff you usually don't say out loud until you're halfway through a bottle of cheap wine with someone who won't judge you. And the more I listened, the more I realized that straight or not, this guy was complicated. Maybe confused. Maybe just tired of pretending. When I finally got up to leave, he walked me to the door, and for a second, I thought he might say something else. But instead, he just looked at me, really looked and said, "Thanks for listening." I smiled back, feeling a weird mix of hope and something like regret. Because I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the start. And whatever was going on behind those eyes, I wanted to be a part of figuring it out. Walking back to my apartment that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not with the world, but with me. I kept replaying his words, the way he said, "I'm straight," but then his eyes didn't match. It was like he was trying to convince himself more than me. And honestly, that kind of vulnerability made him all the more real, all the more human. The next few days, I tried to act normal, but normal felt impossible. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a text from him, though we hadn't exchanged numbers yet. I wasn't even sure if he wanted to hear from me, but I guess I hoped he did. Then, on Saturday afternoon, I got a message. "Hey, this is Sam. Thanks for the other night." Short and simple, but it sent my heart into overdrive. I replied quickly, asking if he wanted to grab coffee sometime, trying to sound casual when I definitely was not. We met the next day at a local cafe, a cozy spot with bookshelves lining the walls and the smell of fresh espresso in the air. He arrived a few minutes late, looking a little more put together than at the bar. Clean-shaven, a crisp button-up rolled at the sleeves. But those eyes, same deep, unreadable eyes, were still there, and they caught me off guard when he smiled. The conversation went slow at first, almost cautious. I could tell he was measuring every word, like he was afraid of saying too much or too little. We talked about music again, this time swapping playlists on our phones, and somehow that felt like a way of sharing without getting too personal. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension growing, a quiet pull between us that neither of us was ready to name. After a while, the topic shifted to relationships. I asked him if he was seeing anyone, and he shook his head quickly. No, not really. I haven't been. I guess I've been avoiding that stuff. I nodded, trying to read between the lines. Avoiding how? He looked down at his coffee cup, stirring it absent-mindedly. I don't know. It's complicated. I've always told people I was straight because it was easier. Less questions, less explaining. But that's not the whole truth. That hit me harder than I expected. Because I'd been there, in my own way. Pretending, hiding parts of myself to make life simpler. And hearing him say it out loud made me want to reach across the table and tell him it was okay to not have it all figured out. Instead, I said, "You don't have to explain anything to me, Sam. Whatever you are, or aren't, it's okay." He looked up, surprised, like he hadn't expected me to say that. Then he smiled, a little softer this time. "Thanks, that means more than you know." From there, things started to open up, slow but steady. We met a few more times over the next couple of weeks. More coffee dates, a few quick dinners, and one lazy Sunday afternoon spent wandering through a park just talking about our families, our fears, the weird little things that make us who we are. I found myself wanting to be around him more, to hear his voice, to see those restless eyes soften when he laughed, or got caught off guard by something silly. But even as we grew closer, there was this invisible wall between us. Sam was careful with his words, guarded about the parts of himself he still hadn't shared. And every time I caught that flicker in his eyes, the hesitation, the doubt, I knew he was holding something back, something big. One evening, after a late dinner at a dive taco place we both liked, we ended up sitting on a bench outside, the city lights shimmering behind us. It was quiet, except for distant traffic and the occasional hum of a night bird. I could feel the weight of the unspoken hanging between us. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what's the story with you and this straight thing? Because honestly, I don't buy it." He laughed, a little bitter but genuine. "Yeah, I know, neither do I." We both fell silent after that. Then he took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "I've been trying to convince myself for years that I was straight because it felt safer. I grew up in a place where being anything else wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. So I shoved it down, told myself stories that made sense for a while, but it's like my eyes never lied." He paused, like weighing whether to keep going. "I've liked guys for as long as I can remember, but I never let myself say it out loud. Not even to myself, really. It's easier to live in that space where no one asks questions." I reached out and gave his hand a squeeze. "You don't have to live there anymore." He smiled, but it was tinged with vulnerability. I want to believe that. I want to believe that there's more for me than all the pretending. But it's scary. "I get that," I said softly. "Scary as hell." Then, half joking, I added, "But you're not alone." He squeezed my hand back, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that felt like relief. That night marked a turning point. We didn't rush into anything, but the barrier between us started to crumble. We talked late into the night on the phone, shared old stories and new dreams. He asked questions I didn't expect, the kind that showed he was really thinking about what connection could mean, beyond just the surface. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was falling for him. Not the label he gave himself, but the person he was underneath all the layers. Messy, complicated, scared, but brave enough to keep showing up. I don't know exactly where this will go, but for now, I'm glad to be here, sitting with the mystery of Sam and his eyes that speak louder than words. Because sometimes, the truth isn't about what someone says, it's about what they don't say, but can't hide. And in those quiet moments, you find something real. The next few weeks felt like we were tiptoeing around something big. The kind of delicate dance where every step matters, but neither of us wanted to be the one to mess it up. Sam wasn't the type to rush into things, and honestly, neither was I. We both seemed to understand that whatever this was, it needed to unfold at its own pace. One evening, we ended up at this tiny record store downtown, a place I swear existed to make you feel like you'd traveled back to the 90s. Sam was more animated than I'd seen him in a while, flipping through racks of vinyl with a grin, talking about bands I'd never heard of. I watched him, feeling this warm pull in my chest, like every little thing he said or did was quietly marking its place in my brain. At some point, he looked over at me, eyes bright, and said, "You know, I'm really glad you didn't just walk away after that first night." I laughed. I wasn't about to let you scare me off with a "I'm straight" disclaimer. He shook his head with that same easy smile, but then his expression softened. I was scared though, scared you'd see the real me and decide I wasn't worth the trouble. "Sam," I said, stepping closer, "I'm already here. I'm not going anywhere." He looked down for a moment, then back up, and that's when I saw it, the vulnerability in his eyes, the unspoken question hanging between us. I reached out, fingers brushing his arm lightly, and he didn't pull away. That simple touch seemed to break something loose. Suddenly, the air between us was charged, and I realized that I wanted to close the distance, to see what this felt like beyond all the half-truths and cautious conversations. "Can I kiss you?" I asked, voice low. His breath hitched, and with a small nod, he leaned in. It was gentle at first, like testing the waters, but then it deepened, slow and sure, like we were both trying to memorize the shape of each other's lips. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, and the world seemed to shrink down to just those quiet moments. For the first time, Sam's eyes said everything: hope, fear, and maybe even a little bit of relief. After that night, things didn't suddenly become easy. Sam had his walls, and sometimes they came up without warning. There were nights when he'd get quiet, distant, like he was wrestling with something inside, and I learned to give him space without taking it personally. One Saturday, we went for a long walk along the river, the city skyline glowing in the dusk. We talked about everything and nothing until we found ourselves sitting on a bench, watching the water flow by. "I'm still figuring this out," Sam said quietly, staring at his hands folded in his lap. "Not just the feelings, but what it means. To be honest, I'm terrified of what comes next." I nodded. "It's scary for me too, but I don't want fear to decide things for us." He looked up, eyes locking with mine. "Do you think this can work? Two people trying to rewrite the stories they've been telling themselves for years?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I want to try. With you." There was this beat of silence. Then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them shine. "You're braver than me," he said. "Maybe we're brave together," I replied. That moment felt like a promise. Not a guarantee, not a perfect ending, but a start. A fragile, beautiful start. Over the next few weeks, we found a rhythm. Sometimes it was awkward, fumbling through new territory, learning how to be close without rushing. Other times it was easy, like laughter spilling over coffee in the morning, or lazy afternoons spent tangled up on the couch watching dumb shows. One night, we cooked dinner together in my tiny kitchen. Sam chopped vegetables while I managed the stove, and there was this comfortable silence between us that didn't need filling. At one point, he caught me watching him and teased, "What? You've never seen someone chop onions before?" I grinned. "No, I've just never seen you like this. It's nice." He looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and then he said, "I'm glad you're here." The simple words hit me harder than I expected. I reached out and pulled him closer, fingers tangling in his hair. "Me too," I whispered. But even as things felt real, a part of me kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the moment when Sam's carefully constructed walls would come crashing down, or when the weight of all the unspoken truths would become too much. And maybe that was the hardest part, learning to sit in the unknown, to hold space for someone who is still figuring out how to see himself through new eyes. One night, as we lay in bed, Sam turned to me and said, "I'm scared you'll get tired of waiting." I shook my head. "I'm not going anywhere, not if it means being with you." He smiled softly and reached for my hand. "Thank you." That means everything. As I held his hand, feeling the steady beat of hope beneath the fear, I realized that sometimes love isn't about the easy parts. It's about showing up, day after day, seeing each other's cracks, and still choosing to stay. And with Sam, with those eyes full of both doubt and daring, I was ready to see where this could go, even if we didn't have the answers yet. Because maybe that's what mattered most, not knowing the destination, but trusting the journey. A few days after that night, I found myself standing outside Sam's apartment, hesitating before I buzzed him in. It wasn't that I was nervous exactly, but more like that familiar tug in my chest that told me this was important. We'd been inching closer, but something felt different this time. A shift in the air, like we were crossing an invisible line. When the door swung open, Sam was there, wearing that same half smile that always made my stomach flip. "Hey," he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. I followed him inside, and for a moment we just stood there, studying each other like neither of us wanted to be the first to say the thing that was hanging between us. Finally, I took a breath. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, eyes steady. "Why haven't you told anyone else? Like, your friends, your family?" He looked down, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. I don't think they'd get it. Or maybe I'm just scared of what they'd say. I've spent so long hiding parts of myself, I don't know if I'm ready to unpack all that yet." I nodded, understanding more than I could put into words. "That makes sense, but you don't have to do it alone." He looked up, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "I want to believe that. I really do." We sat down on his couch, the space between us charged but comfortable. I wanted to reach out, to bridge that gap, but I also wanted to give him the time and space he needed. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like a shared moment, a quiet promise that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes. Sam was still cautious, but there were moments when his guard slipped. A laugh that reached his eyes, a touch that lingered a little longer, a glance that said more than words ever could. One Friday night, we went to a small art show downtown. The gallery was packed with people, the walls covered in vibrant paintings and photographs. Sam seemed at ease, pointing out pieces that caught his eye, sharing his thoughts without hesitation. At one point, we found ourselves standing in front of a portrait, a man with intense eyes, caught in a moment of quiet reflection. Sam looked at me, then back at the painting. Sometimes I wonder if that's what people see when they look at me, the parts one try to hide. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I see everything, the hidden and the open. He smiled, that soft, real smile that made me forget the noise around USA as we left the gallery, walking hand in hand through the city streets. I felt a quiet certainty settling in. We weren't just two people trying to figure things out. We were building something real. But life, as it always does, threw a curveball. A week later, Sam's phone buzzed during one of our dinner dates. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting in a way I didn't understand at first. "Everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "It's my mom. She found out about us." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "What do you mean, how?" I pressed gently. Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I guess someone from work mentioned it. Or maybe she saw something online. I don't know. She's not happy." I could feel the tension radiating off him, the fear and uncertainty that had been lurking beneath the surface now breaking through. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I told her I wasn't ready to talk about it, that I needed time. But I think she's upset, scared, or maybe just confused. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out, one step at a time." He looked at me, eyes glossy, and nodded. "Thanks for being here." That night, as I walked home, I thought about how hard it was to be seen, not just by a stranger or a friend, but by the people who mattered most. Sam's walls were strong for a reason, built from years of fear and survival. And now that they were cracking, I realized how big a deal this was. The next few days were tense. Sam pulled back a little, more guarded than before. I tried to give him space, but it felt like the silence between us was growing. One afternoon, I texted him, "I miss you. I'm here whenever you're ready." Hours passed without a reply, and I started to worry I'd pushed too hard. But that evening, just as I was about to give up, Sam showed up at my door, looking exhausted but determined. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've been scared, but I don't want to lose what we have." I pulled him inside, wrapping my arms around him. "You're not losing me. Not now, not ever." We spent the night talking, really talking, about fears, about hopes, about what it meant to be honest with ourselves and each other. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real. In the weeks that followed, Sam slowly started opening up more, to friends, to parts of his past he'd kept locked away. Some people were supportive, others less so. But through it all, I was there, his constant in the chaos. One evening, we sat on my couch, the city lights flickering through the window. Sam rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me, for not giving up." I smiled, feeling a swell of emotion I couldn't quite put into words. "I'm not the one who needed to be seen. You are." And in that moment, with his hand in mine and his eyes finally free to be himself, I knew we were exactly where we were supposed to be. Messy, complicated, uncertain, but together. After that night, something shifted in Sam. Not overnight. This isn't a rom-com with perfect timing and instant epiphanies, but there was a softness to him that hadn't been there before. Like the weight he'd been carrying finally got a crack wide enough to let some light in. We kept building on that fragile foundation. Some days, the world felt easier, and Sam would laugh with that genuine sparkle in his eyes. Other days, the old fears crept back. I could see him pull in, retreat behind those walls as if bracing for a storm. It was hard to watch, knowing there wasn't a quick fix for years of conditioning and silence. One Thursday evening, I caught him dialing his phone but hesitating before pressing call. I sat next to him on the couch, nudging his shoulder gently. "Who are you thinking about calling?" I asked. He glanced at me, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "My sister." I blinked. "You haven't talked to her in a while?" "Not really. We're close. But this is new." "I don't know how she'll take it." I nodded, understanding that tightrope walk between wanting to be honest and fearing rejection. "Do you want me to be there?" I offered taut. Sam shook his head, but his eyes softened. "Thanks, but I need to do this on my own." I smiled encouragingly. "Okay, but I'm just a text away if you need backup." He laughed, a little nervous but grateful. The next day, Sam told me he'd finally talked to his sister. The conversation was awkward at first, but it ended better than he expected. "She said she loves me no matter what," he said, relief clear in his voice, "and that she's proud of me for being honest." I felt this surge of happiness for him, knowing how big a deal that was. It was moments like these that made all the uncertainty worth it. The slow, messy unraveling of old fears into something real and raw. Around that time, we started spending more time together in the daytime. Simple stuff like grocery shopping, cooking meals, or just lounging around binge-watching shows neither of us really liked, but found comfort in. One Sunday, we tried our hands at making homemade pizzas. Sam was surprisingly good at tossing dough, and I was more than happy to handle the toppings. As we stood in my cramped kitchen, flour dusting the counter and our hands, he caught my eye and smiled. "You know, I never thought I'd be this relaxed with someone," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I shrugged, grinning. "Well, lucky you. You get me." He laughed, then got serious. "No, really. You make it easy to be me, even when I'm scared." I felt my chest tighten in that familiar way, hope mixed with a little ache. "You don't have to be scared with me," I said softly. And we stood there for a moment, the noise of the city fading behind the windows, just two people trying to figure out how to trust. But of course, life doesn't pause for the moments you want to hold on to. A few days later, Sam's old roommate called, a surprise that came out of nowhere and stirred up a mess of emotions. "We need to talk," Sam said, his face tightening. I could tell this wasn't going to be okay. Says he wants to talk about stuff. Sam told me. I asked if he wanted me there, but he shook his head. "I think I need to handle this alone." I respected that, but I also worried. Old patterns have a way of pulling you back if you let them. A few days later, Sam confided that the meeting stirred up feelings he'd buried. Confusion, guilt, fear of judgment. I haven't told him about us. Sam admitted, voice low. I nodded. That's your choice. You set your own pace. He looked at me, gratitude and vulnerability swirling in his eyes. Thanks for being patient, I smiled. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. In those moments, I realized that love isn't about fixing someone or having all the answers. It's about being present, steady, and willing to walk through the messy parts together. We were still figuring it out, step by step, day by day. One evening after a quiet dinner, Sam and I sat on the fire escape outside my apartment. The city sprawled beneath us. He leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, I'm scared, but I'm also hopeful. I kissed the top of his head. That's all I need to hear. And as the night wrapped around us, with all its uncertainty and possibility, I knew we were writing a story that was real, imperfect, unfolding, and ours. Months had passed since that night on the fire escape, and somehow, in the slow rhythm of our days together, things had settled into a kind of peace I hadn't dared hope for. Sam and I weren't perfect. We still stumbled over fears and old doubts, but we'd built something real, something steady. One Saturday afternoon, we found ourselves back at that little record store where we'd first really started to open up, the one with the dusty vinyls and that clunky old stereo in the corner. Sam was flipping through a stack of albums while I wandered the aisles, my fingers trailing over the spines, like I was searching for a soundtrack to this new chapter of our lives. He caught my eye and smiled that soft smile that always made my heart skip. Without a word, he came over and slipped a record into my hands, a worn copy of an album by a band we'd talked about months ago but never owned. I thought this might be a good one for us, he said. I laughed, feeling the warmth spread through me. It is. Perfect, actually. We paid for the record and stepped outside, the city buzzing around us like a backdrop to the quiet bubble we'd created. Sam slipped his hand into mine, something that had once felt fraught with anxiety, but now was just natural. We walked for a while, talking about everything and nothing, the easy flow between us a stark contrast to the tension that had filled those early days. Later that evening, as we sat on my couch listening to the album, Sam turned to me, eyes bright. I'm still figuring all this out, he said, voice quiet but sure. I reached over and took his hand, squeezing gently. Me too. But that's okay. We don't have to have all the answers. He smiled, leaning his head against my shoulder, and I felt this deep sense of rightness settle over me. Thanks for being patient with me, he whispered. Thank you for trusting me. In that moment, I realized that the labels, the fears, the I'm straight disclaimers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the connection we'd forged. The honesty, the vulnerability, the decision to keep choosing each other every day. Sam's eyes, once guarded and uncertain, now held something softer but no less intense. A quiet certainty that, together, we could face whatever came next. And as the music played on, filling the room with memories and dreams, I knew this wasn't the end of our story but the beginning of something real. Something worth fighting for. Something true.